It was a typical Tuesday morning at Starbucks, the familiar hum of the coffee machines filling the air as customers trickled in, one after the other. The baristas worked in perfect synchrony, preparing the usual orders: lattes, cappuccinos, and iced coffees. For Sarah, it was just another regular shift. She had been working at Starbucks for over a year now, always the friendly face behind the counter. But despite her efforts to stay positive, she felt drained. The weight of bills, the pressure of raising her child as a single mother, and the constant exhaustion from juggling work and family was taking its toll. She wiped down the counter once more, glancing at the long line of customers. As usual, everyone seemed in a rush. She had long since learned not to take it personally when people were short with her or didn't seem to notice her exhaustion. She was just a cog in the wheel of the daily grind, another worker in the service industry trying to make ends meet. But there was something different about today. It wasn't the typical rush of customers, nor the overwhelming number of orders. It was a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that something big was about to happen. Sarah couldn't explain it, but she felt it deep in her chest. The bell above the door rang as it opened, and in walked a young man. At first glance, he didn't seem out of place. He was dressed casually, nothing flashy. A black hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap. Just another customer, she thought. But then something about him caught her attention. The way he walked. There was an understated presence, a quiet confidence, that seemed out of place in a Starbucks. Sarah turned to greet him, offering her usual friendly smile. "Hi, welcome to Starbucks. What can I get started for you today?" The young man smiled back, a calm yet sincere expression on his face. He spoke softly, his voice carrying a certain warmth that stood out in the busy atmosphere. "A grande caramel macchiato, please," he said. As Sarah prepared his order, she couldn't help but notice how composed he seemed. Most customers were distracted, scrolling through their phones or chatting with friends. But this young man, seemed fully present, paying attention to the smallest details. It was almost as though he didn't belong in the hustle and bustle of a busy Starbucks. He was too calm, too thoughtful for that. But Sarah didn't think much of it. After all, it wasn't her place to judge. She just continued to make his drink, her mind wandering back to her own troubles. "Here you go," she said, handing him the caramel macchiato with a smile. "Enjoy your drink." He took the cup from her hand, his fingers brushing hers lightly in the process. A fleeting moment, yet something about it made Sarah pause. It wasn't the touch itself, it was the way he looked at her. His eyes met hers with a quiet understanding, as if he saw something beyond the surface. But the moment passed quickly, and he took a sip of his drink, nodding in appreciation. Then, without any prompt, he set the cup down on the counter and turned back to Sarah, his gaze steady. "You've been working hard today," Barron said, his voice calm and composed as though he'd been thinking about this for a while. "I can tell you're doing your best." Sarah blinked, surprised by his comment. She hadn't expected him to notice, let alone say something like that. Most customers barely even looked her way, too focused on their own lives to consider the people serving them. But Barron seemed different. His words didn't feel like idle pleasantries, they felt sincere. "Thank you," Sarah said, slightly flustered. "It's just been one of those busy mornings, you know?" Barron nodded as if he understood. Then, after a brief pause, he spoke again. "You know, I've been thinking about how people go through life, day by day, just trying to survive," he said, his voice softer now but still full of conviction. "But sometimes, we forget that little acts of kindness, ones we barely think about, can make a huge difference." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had always done her best to be kind to others, to help where she could. But kindness didn't always seem to be reciprocated. Life had a way of knocking people down, of making them feel small and invisible. It was hard to imagine that something as simple as a smile or a small gesture could change anything. Barron, as if sensing her doubt, continued. "I want to help," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I believe that everyone deserves a little bit of kindness. And sometimes, a small gesture can mean more than you think." Before Sarah could respond, Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. He slid it across the counter to her, a small, folded piece of paper. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she looked down at it. "Wait, what is this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Barron's smile remained calm, unruffled. "It's for you. Take it. Use it for yourself or for whatever you need. No one should have to struggle like you do. Not when a little bit of kindness can make a world of difference." Sarah stared at the check, unable to believe what she was seeing. It was a significant amount of money, far more than she could have imagined. She felt a lump form in her throat. Was this real? Was Barron Trump really giving her this money, a complete stranger, for no reason other than to help? I don't know if I can accept this, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I don't even know what to say. This is too much. Barron simply smiled and shook his head. You don't need to say anything. Just know that you're not alone. People care. And sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at Barron. She had never expected anything like this. She had worked hard her whole life, struggling to make ends meet, trying to provide for her child, and yet, it felt like the universe was always working against her. But here in front of her, was a young man who, with one simple gesture, had made her feel seen. He had given her something more than just money, he had given her hope. Barron turned to leave, but before he stepped out of the store, he paused and looked back at Sarah one last time. Remember, he said softly, no act of kindness is ever too small. You matter. And with that, Barron Trump walked out of Starbucks, leaving Sarah standing at the counter, her heart full and her hands trembling. Later that evening, as Sarah sat in her small apartment, the weight of Barron's gesture began to settle in. She had thought about the check all day, wondering if it was real, wondering why someone like Barron Trump, someone who didn't even know her, would go out of his way to help. The money wasn't just a lifeline, it was a reminder that kindness could still exist in a world that sometimes felt cold and unforgiving. But it wasn't just the money. It was the way Barron had spoken to her, the quiet understanding in his eyes. She had never expected to have a conversation like that with him. It wasn't just a handout, it was an acknowledgement of her struggles, a recognition of her humanity. In that moment, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would carry this kindness forward. She would not let this moment go to waste. She would find a way to help others in the same way Barron had helped her. Because sometimes, it was the small acts of kindness that made all the difference. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, be sure to check out our other stories, we always have a special story for you. Sarah's life wasn't going to change overnight. She knew that. But in the weeks that followed, something began to shift inside her. She started paying more attention to the people around her, to the small moments of kindness that happened every day. She smiled more at her customers. She began offering help to others, even if it was just holding the door open or offering a word of encouragement. And while her financial situation didn't immediately improve, she felt more at peace, more hopeful for the future. Barron's act of kindness had reminded her of something important, that even when life feels impossible, there are still moments of light, still people who care. And it was those moments, those acts of kindness, that had the power to change everything. The check, though spent, had become a symbol, a reminder that kindness mattered. And that even on the hardest days, there was always someone out there who would see her, who would help her just because. As Sarah sat in her living room, looking at her son as he played with his toys, she knew one thing for sure. She would always remember Barron Trump. His generosity had left a mark on her heart, a mark that would inspire her to be kinder, more compassionate, and more hopeful, no matter what life threw her way. And as the sun set outside her window, she realized that, just like Barron had said, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the world.